Spurs Nation, welcome to the second episode of Spurs Alley, the channel where we'll talk past, present, future, anything and everything Spurs. Now, my name is Chris. I'm your host, lifetime Spurs fan, and self-appointed Spurs expert. Thank you so much for joining me today. Now, on today's show, we're going to talk about the Spurs free agency, the moves they made or really haven't made, talk about the biggest trade rumor that has the Spurs name attached to it, so you'll get my thoughts on that. And talking about the lack of moves, let's say, for the Spurs, we'll take a look at our current roster and really, more importantly, the point guard position. As a Spurs fan, how comfortable are you at Trey Jones being the starting point guard? And then we'll finish off the show with our Rivals Watch. So let's go ahead and get this show started. So NBA free agency has come and gone. The best players are off the board. They've already agreed to who they're going to sign with. And pretty much, the Spurs did what I thought they were going to do. And I did talk about it in episode 1. They didn't do much. They're going to stay patient. They didn't overpay for any kind of free agent. What they did do was sign the players that they needed back from last year's team. Okay? Some of the casualties, though, some of the players that are not coming back are Keita Bates-Diop. He actually is going to sign with the Suns. Romeo Langford, one of those players that we got from the Derek to Boston trade, wasn't even offered a contract. And Gorgui Dieng, he was a 10-year veteran, so no real surprise there that he's not going to come back. Now, the biggest rumor that we've heard so far is obviously the Dame Lillard to the Spurs trade. And that kind of rumor, number one, if you think about it, all the picks that we would have to give up, plus one of our core players like either Keldon or Devin Vassell, it would just gut all the assets that we would have. I mean, they're trying to go after our Atlanta Hawks unprotected first-round picks. So that's something that if the Blazers don't get something like that, I don't see them doing it. Now, besides those assets being thrown around, I mean, my biggest concern was that, just like some other outlets maybe have said, is that I didn't understand why Dame would want to go to a rebuilding team. I appreciate that he threw the Spurs out there. It's cool that he has respect for the Spurs, but the Spurs are in year 2 of rebuild mode, and we're maybe another 2 to 3 years away from contending for a championship, hopefully. And so it just doesn't line up, having Dame come in and really fast forward the plans that I'm sure the Spurs front office doesn't really have in mind. And I just don't really see it happening. I don't think it's going to happen, honestly. And that's just my thoughts on that Dame Lillard trade. It was something that's just not really lining up with how the Spurs have already decided they're going to fully rebuild this team. With Brian Wright, he did make some good moves. He actually was able to make a trade that he didn't have to get involved, but this goes to his genius, to his creativeness, that he was able to pick up a good bench play in Cedi Osman. Also, he picked up Lamar Stevens and an energy guy and a second-round pick along the way. Some of you might think that this is just a whatever trade, but Cedi Osman, number one, he had his best year coming off the bench, and that's what we're going to use him for, off the bench. He looks like he's going to take Keita's place in the rotation. Also, Lamar Stevens, we'll see what we have with him. But it's really the second pick that has, the most value to me, because in the new CBA, they do have a lot more value when you're trading them to contending teams and things like that. Now, the players that we did pick up and that we did re-sign include Sandro Mamu Kelashvili, so we call him Mamu. He's actually our third bench center. He still can shoot threes. He's a good player with some toughness, so I like that signing. Julian Champagny, he is actually really good with a 3-point shot. He's the number 4 spot that can kind of guard even the 3 or 2. He hustles, so I really like what he did with his campaign last year when he finished strong. Dominic Barlow also is back. He's a big athletic forward as well, and I like what I see from him in his development. Now, the most important free agent that we did sign was our own Trey Jones. He recently signed a 2-year, $20 million deal. He was our starter from last year, and after the free agency period thus settled, he pretty much came out as the, again, undisputed starter for the Spurs. So up next, I wanted to take just a quick look at Trey Jones to see how comfortable, we should feel with Trey Jones being our starter, and what can we expect from him in the 4th year. So we'll get into that in one quick moment. So if you watched the draft, and even, before the draft, after we picked up Wembanyama, there were a lot of rumors that we were going to try to move up, right? Try to draft the point guard. Obviously, that didn't happen. We ended up getting CD Sissoko, which I am totally happy with. And now, after this free agency period has ended, we have pretty much a clear understanding of where the Spurs are going to go with their point guard. Our 4th year point guard, Trey Jones, is now our clear-cut starter. Whether we like it or not, he is going to be the man. Now, he has improved year over year. His first year, he mostly was in Austin, just like Corey Joseph. And then his second year, played 11 games only, and finally took over last year. Out of a possible 68, he started in 65. So he took over that spot and made it his. Now, what did we learn last year? So let's take a look at his strengths and also his weaknesses. For his strengths, this guy can play some really good man-on-man defense on pretty much any point guard in the league. He has speed, quickness, that he can stay in front of anybody pretty much. Now, he also averaged a little over a steal per game, which did lead the team last year in steals. That just shows you that he has a really good feel for the defensive side of the ball. And those are good qualities that you want if you're a Coach Popovich team. Now, on the offensive side, he actually is okay as far as his shot with 2-point. I mean, he did average over 50% inside 3-point range. But his big strength is that he takes care of the basketball, and he does also push the ball up and can get some really easy assists. He averaged 6.6 assists, only to 1.6 turnovers. So that tells you that he is really good in finding his teammates, and he doesn't turn over the ball to where he can't be trusted. That's another great Coach Popovich quality that he has, which I can see why, we decided to trust him. This is why we brought him back and thought, let's see what he can do with us. For his weaknesses, I think we all know what his biggest weakness is. We've seen it, and that is his long-range shot. Last year, he shot a miserable 28% from three-point land. And, I mean, that's obviously why he fell all the way down to the second round. And that's what's really holding him back from cementing his spot as the Spurs floor general of the future. I mean, I'm sure the Spurs would love to have Trey be our answer for long term, but that's totally unacceptable to be at 28% in today's NBA and to be considered a starting point guard. He has to improve at least to 35, 36%. In today's NBA, that's where you want to be at to be a serviceable shooter from three-point range. We don't have our famous, ex-famous shooting coach. He's now with Oklahoma City, and so he's not going to have that training from Chip, and so because of that, I don't see maybe that big jump from 28 to 35%. I'm thinking maybe more along the lines of 31, 32%, hopefully 33%. I mean, even that would be a pretty big improvement. So, because of those weaknesses and limitations, what should we expect from Trey this next year? Let's talk about it. So where does that leave us? I know some of you may be thinking, hey, don't forget about Devontae Graham. He can be our starter. And yeah, I mean, I do like Devontae Graham, but he, number one, has only played 20 games for the Spurs. He did start in 8 of them. However, he still has some catching up to do as far as corporate knowledge that Trey Jones already has in his 3 years in the Spurs system. Also, there's Blake Wesley. He talked about gaining 10 pounds of muscle and really becoming just more consistent since he did get hurt last year. Now, for him to move up, he's going to have to play near perfect basketball for him to be considered our starter. So what I think will end up happening is that Trey, he's going to end up being our starter for the beginning of the year, but really for the entire season. Devontae is still going to push him, of course, but the worst case scenario I see is maybe, them splitting time and being a two-headed monster type of deal where, Coach Pop maybe goes with a hot hand at the end of the fourth there. Now, I talked about the missing element, and I think we can all talk about the missing element being his three-point shot. Trey Jones can be our point guard of the future. He's already earned Pop's trust. He can keep us competitive on most nights just with what he brings to the table alone. But if he can improve his three-point shot to that 35, 36% range, that becomes a serviceable three-point knockdown shooter, where he has pretty much all the tools to be our floor general of the future. He is still in that wait-and-see period because that's why we only signed him for 2 years. And don't think, we can always get a free agent next year, because next year the best free agent point guard available seems to be DeJounte Murray. And I don't know about you, but I don't think DeJounte wants to come back. He's talked about how the Spurs have held him back and how we played mind games with him. So that would be a little strange to now see the Spurs and DeJounte maybe try to reunite next year. I don't really see that happening, and I don't think Atlanta would want to see that happen, especially after giving 2 first-round picks. Also, the trade deadline, can still happen. Maybe we make a move, for another player before this trade deadline ends. But at the end of the day, I think that we're going to stick to our planned rebuild of going slow and steady. We're not desperate to make any desperate moves. So stick with Trey Jones, and hopefully he does end up getting that missing element and shooting that three-point shot at a respectable level for this next year. Now, talking about moves that the Spurs have made, let's move on now to our rivals. What our rivals have been doing, our division rivals first, and then we'll finish up with the Lakers. So we'll see what they've done. Spurs Nation, welcome back to Spurs Alley. I'm your host, Chris, and we're on to the last part of the show where we're going to keep a close eyes on our division rivals. Memphis, they actually just signed a player for a record-breaking deal. The Rockets, they've been making some really big splashes in free agency. Mavs, looks like they're just trying to keep themselves relevant and keep themselves busy. Pelicans, they were able to keep their best defender. Let's go ahead and take a look what that was. Now first, talking about Memphis, they actually just signed Desmond Bane to a team record $207 million deal. Now, some of you might think that's quite a bit of money for someone that, hasn't made an all-star team. But, this guy is 6'5". He's built like a football player. He actually can shoot the three, can take it to the hole, and it's probably going to end up being a really good bargain for the Grizzlies here in the future. So actually that's a really good signing for them. I'm sure any other team would like to have Desmond Bane out there on their team. Now, to help with John Morant missing for the first 25 games of the year, they seem to have agreed to terms with Derrick Rose. He's basically just a stopgap in the time that John Morant is gone. But once Ja's back, he's still a really good player to have coming off the bench. That's a really fantastic pickup there for them. For New Orleans, they actually were able to re-sign their best defender, which is Herb Jones. He's the 2021 second-round pick, and he's turned out to be one of the best defenders in the NBA. He creates havoc on defense. He can guard so many positions. And if you keep it with NBA fantasy basketball, he gets stocks. This boy is averaging 100 steals and 40 blocks in his last 2 seasons. That's fantastic, right? So that was some really good business from New Orleans. The Mavericks, they did what we expected and re-signed Kyrie. They couldn't lose him. There wasn't really much of a market for Kyrie as well. And, that has to do with a variety of reasons. His time with Brooklyn didn't go so well, being, vaccine denier and such. Also, when he came to Dallas, he wasn't meshing well with Luka. They actually started losing and they tanked at the end of the year. Let's see what they do this next year. They didn't get much help to improve. They got Seth Curry, which is, he's a good player, but doesn't really move the needle there. They re-signed some of their players, but let's see what they do with those two ball-dominant players in Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving this next year. I'm not expecting a lot, honestly. For the Rockets, they made some really big splashes. They signed pretty much the biggest fish out there, and that's Fred VanVleet. Now, if you remember, Fred VanVleet was that player that during the Toronto's championship parade, he was heard in the background saying, F Coach Pop. So now we definitely have more of a reason to boo Fred VanVleet. And the Rockets didn't just stop there. They also they signed Dylan the Villain Brooks, someone that has been a thorn on the Spurs side for quite a while already, and he's just going to continue to be so with the Rockets. They also signed one-time Spur, Jock Landale, who was with Phoenix last year, but now he's going to be a Rocket. And they recently completed a trade to land our very own Patty Mills. I know he hasn't been our very own for quite a while, but Patty's always going to be a Spur, but now he's going to be a Rocket. So that's going to be really strange and, difficult to see him in that Rocket red. But what are the Lakers doing? Let's move on to the Lakers. Well, the Lakers actually have been pretty busy during this free agency period. They were able to retain some of their best players, players like Rui Hachimura, D'Angelo Russell, and fan favorite Austin Reeves. But they were able to actually fill up their roster with some other good moves. They got Gabe Vincent, the Miami Heat point guard that actually did pretty good in that Miami Heat finals run. Taurean Prince, he's been around for a while, and Cam Reddish as well. They were picked up, but also they picked up Jackson Hayes, and that's going to give them some depth there in the front court. So, do these moves actually help them and become better? Yeah, it does give them a better team. Does that give them the edge over the Nuggets? Or does that still depend on how well AD plays against the Joker? You guys tell me what you think in the comments. Are the Lakers better than the Nuggets? Well, that's it for today's show. Thank you so much for joining me. If you liked the video, like it, subscribe, turn on that notification bell, and I'll see you on the next video.